Serenbe is a place where people live, work, learn, and play in celebration of life's beauty. And we're here to share the stories that connect residents and guests to each other and to nature. This is Serenbe Stories. In Carrie Battan's recent Outside Magazine article, she came to Serenbe to see if it truly offered respite from, as she wrote, the exhausting effects of her fast-paced digital urban life. In this episode of Serenbe Stories, we talk with Carrie about her visit in fall 2019, the Outside article that came out of that visit, and how her life has changed since the coronavirus has forced people away from public spaces and leaving her life in Brooklyn. We also talk about the positive effects on the environment, and she wonders if more communities will begin to live life the way Serenbe does. But first, Serenbe Stories is brought to you by the Inn at Serenbe. The Inn is nestled in the rolling countryside of bucolic Serenbe, where guests can walk on the 15 miles of trails through preserved forest land, the wildflower meadow, and the animal village. You can relax by the pool, hot tub, or in rocking chairs on the wraparound porch. Play on the croquet lawn, swings, and in-ground trampolines. Connect with nature and each other, all while staying in luxurious rooms on the Inn grounds or within the community of Serenbe. Book your stay today at serenbeinn.com. So I want to welcome everybody back here today to Serenbe Stories. Steve Nygren and I are here today with Carrie Battan, who is a journalist who lives in New York, who had we had the great privilege of having her here for almost a week here last fall. And so I want to welcome you, Carrie, to Serenbe Stories.
Hi, Monica and Steve. Thanks so much for having me.
Carrie came to us through Outside Magazine. I think they chose you to do a story on Serenbe. And you have been a journalist for a number of years, have been living in Brooklyn, working for the New Yorker since 2015 as well. And I believe you're a staff writer there.
Yes.
Contributed to Time, GQ, New York Magazine, Rolling Stone, and had spent some time at the website Pitchfork as a staff writer for a number of years. So love to hear from you, Carrie. Before we get into, your time at Serenbe, how is life for you right now? We're in the middle of shelter in place with COVID. You've been living in Brooklyn for a number of years, but I think you told me that you've headed out to Rhinebeck, New York, which is sort of in the upstate area. So what's happening in your world?
Yeah. Rhinebeck is about 2 hours north. It's in the Hudson Valley, and it's kind of very idyllic farm country. And I've had an interesting quarantine because I was originally supposed to be going to a friend's house in Middletown, Rhode Island. Independent of the pandemic, we were just going to be there. My boyfriend is currently working on a book, and so he was going to do like a little writer's retreat up there, and we were going to be there. So we drove up there. I believe it was, about a month and a half ago. We drove up to Rhode Island, and then the next day, coronavirus was declared a pandemic. And so the people who owned the house, they decided they were going to come back and sort of reclaim the house and quarantine there. So we drove back to New York City, and we came back to a completely changed New York City where everybody was inside all the time. All businesses had shut down. No restaurants or bars were serving people. And so we were in New York City for a few weeks, which was very strange. And then I have a dear friend whose parents own a house in Rhinebeck. So a couple weeks after that, we decided to drive up here when things were starting to get really, really bad in New York City, and it was becoming kind of the hot spot. And, it feel like I keep telling people I almost feel guilty about how perversely enjoyable quarantine has been, especially, in a house where you have space to cook and breathe, and you're not like constantly interacting with other people. Life is just a little bit easier. And so I am up here with my boyfriend and one other couple we are very close friends with. And, I have some work to do, but I don't have a ton of work because a lot of reporting projects have been obviously paused because I can't really travel anywhere. And so, it feels weirdly a little bit like a vacation, like an extended vacation of just like, cooking really long, involved, complicated meals and taking long walks and playing with the dog and watching movies that I didn't get the chance to watch. And playing a lot of card games. So that it has been what my quarantine is like. And it hasn't all been wonderful. Every day there's sort of a shift in my psychological outlook, but yeah, I really cannot complain. I feel very fortunate to be where I am.
What is life like in Rhinebeck?
Life in Rhinebeck, honestly, since I got up here, I was thinking about how similar it feels to life in Serenbe. It's very, there's a lot of farm country. There are a lot of horses. There's just a lot of open space and nature to interact with. And we've been trying our best to patronize the local farm stands that are still open and functioning in this time. And so, yeah, it's a lot more nature than I'm typically exposed to.
I'm familiar with Rhinebeck. We have friends and all up there. Are people out walking the trails in the nature areas?
Yeah. We've been going to, there's the very well-known local trail called Poets Walk. And, you get out there and it's not swarmed or anything, but people are definitely still getting outside and doing the hikes and the walks.
And they're all respecting each other and stepping aside. We find here that
yeah, they are. And I noticed there was a big shift a couple of weeks ago when I don't remember which body of authority declared it was necessary for everybody to wear masks, but nobody was wearing masks outside in Rhinebeck prior to that. And then the next day, as soon as it was announced that everybody should be wearing masks, you walk outside and everybody has a mask.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're sort of have been seeing the same thing from everybody's outside. I feel like people were always outside, but they're even more outside now, on trails and being able to walk around. And same thing, it feels sort of the same. It's quieter, right? Because we don't have as many people visiting because Georgia has been under a shelter in place. But I do think it'll be interesting because our governor is releasing that on Friday. Mm-hmm. And so it'll be interesting to see how things sort of adjust in the next couple of weeks. And our governor, I don't believe, Steve, he has not said that we're required to wear masks. I think it's more of a suggestion. And so it'll be interesting to see what kind of behaviors people have at Serenbe, because I think there is this, like Rhinebeck, people feel very comfortable because there's so much outdoor space that you don't feel like you're in these close quarters. And so I'm sure it is a bit safer, but it feels safer because you're outdoors and you're not in a close quarters of like New York City. But anytime I leave Serenbe, I definitely am putting on a mask if I'm going to go to the grocery store or, go to any, sort of outside public spaces.
You mean you've left Serenbe, Monica?
Only like once. My husband has been doing all of the shopping, but I did leave once and it was just bizarre.
It's amazing how you get so used to just not leaving.
Yeah. It hasn't. I really haven't left. And my husband will go out maybe once a week and that's kind of it.
Are the restaurants open for to-go food in Rhinebeck?
Yeah, and most of it is curbside to go. And it's interesting, like there's I don't know why this local ice cream shop was declared an essential business, but it was. And what they make you do is they make you sit in the parking lot and call them to give them your order. And then you have to pay with exact change and they kind of slide out the ice cream out the window and you pick it up and you leave the money. It's a quite smart and savvy approach to selling ice cream. And I'm grateful that we've had access to it, but it is very strange. And going to the grocery store and seeing the kind of lines that staggered lines, like you stay 6 feet here, and on Tuesday and Thursdays they reserve the grocery store for people over the age of 60 to come and do their shopping.
Yeah.
And how long are the lines for ice cream in the parking lot?
Well, it was amazing. The ice cream store is only open. It's only open a few days a week, and so we had to call 21 times. We got the busy signal 21 times in the parking lot of the ice cream shop before we were finally able to put our order in. So it's quite, they're doing, the business is booming at the ice cream store.
Yeah. Yeah, we had pretty quickly went to a couple of our locations, our restaurants, The Hill, and also went to online ordering. But it will be interesting as dine-in will be available over the coming weeks. I've been reading a ton about like contactless payment. Do people want to touch pens? Do they want to touch credit cards? I mean, it's just a really interesting world of things that we just do every day and take for granted. Will that change, or will the customer demand that, and or will the establishment demand these changes? Will be really interesting to see.
And how is Serenbe going to handle the sort of reopening of Georgia this week and next? Are you guys going to allow dine in and sort of reboot some of the events that you'd had planned?
Event-wise, I don't believe we're going to be doing much, but the restaurants are going to slowly allow, but it's you can only have, I forget what percent of your seating. For instance, the Blue-Eyed Daisy will only have 10 people inside. And so we're going to spread the seating out. Okay. And then anyone serving customers will be required to wear a mask, and they're all wearing gloves. So it's we're following the rules, but going ahead and reopening according to the guidelines to see what happens. We've had no cases, and so it's sort of surreal here. And I think that's one of the interesting things to look at is this same rules that apply to New York. Should they apply to places like Rhinebeck and Serenbe and other places that have had no incidences and have open spaces? So.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, have you guys done anything to, you've had no incidences, so have you taken any precautions because I know a lot of small towns and some small islands off the coast of Maine are doing this thing of sort of, shutting down the ferries and sort of avoiding people coming in to preserve the no cases. And I wonder if you guys have taken any precautions against having people potentially bring it to Serenbe.
We really haven't, because everyone's adhering to social distancing and sanitation, any doorknobs that are handled, and so that kind of thing. So we're just making everyone aware. But we really analyzed, and it was like you either go all the way. If you're shutting the ferries down, no one leaves or comes in, then that is a true controlled site. We really weren't able to do that because we do have some people that are working and in the essential places, hospitals and what have you. So they would have had to find housing outside of their own Serenbe if we were to go to that extreme. So as we looked at all of the pros and cons, we realized there was no sense in being halfway on it, that the best thing was to just have good policy and awareness and keep everyone aware to be cautious and follow the rules for everyone here, no matter what you did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think probably the first things that will sort of come back might be a 5 to 10 person farm tour in the outdoors with social distancing. Maybe masks are encouraged. That's going to be really dependent on the governor and CDC of what the rules are going to be. But I don't think we're going to be coming back with any 100+ person events anytime soon. I think we'll really think about what things are outside. Maybe again, goat yoga might come back in a month, and it was already limited in numbers. And I think each business will sort of slowly figure that out of what to do based on, appropriate guidelines.
One interesting new event we've created due to this is our Porch Connect. And so we have established a night in each community once a week where people are out on their porches, and people can drive by on their golf carts or walk on their way to pick up their to-go food or what have you, and wave to the neighbors. So it's a piece of connection while still staying socially distanced. And because of our porches are 8-10 feet from the sidewalk, it makes it very connected yet safe.
Oh, that's so nice. That's so nice.
And creative. Some people are doing art and others music and all sorts of innovative things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I imagine it probably provides people the opportunity to connect more than they typically would if there were no quarantine. They would have to take advantage of it because we have so little chance to actually do it. So everybody probably gets really excited for it, I would bet.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So, Carrie, we were absolutely thrilled when the article came out with Outside. And, you came for, was it 5 nights last fall? I'm trying to remember. how long you were
either
here.
4 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I think maybe it was 4 nights and 5 days, or 5 days and 4 nights, something like that. But yeah, I felt by the end, I felt like an honorary resident.
Definitely. And I know that, the article is great. It sort of starts off with a very confused Uber driver of like, where are you having me go? Because everybody typically goes north in Atlanta from the airport, and in this time you needed to go south. But sort of talk us through sort of like your initial impressions when you were asked to do the piece, right? And then once you got here, and then obviously through your experience, and then if any of that's changed over time, I'd be sort of curious what your thoughts are, because it's a super fun piece, but obviously like great points about like, your own stress and health and things that you do in New York or what you're doing now. So just walk us through sort of when you got the pitch, or, that Outside wanted to do this. And then when you came, sort of what were your sort of conceptions?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I was very, very excited when I got the pitch, because I had, I'd heard of Serenbe in the past before my editor reached out, but I hadn't done any kind of in-depth research. And I think they reached out to me because I've written a few pieces sort of that are like more immersive and wellnessy. And I think they were interested in my understanding of the wellness world. And, I think in the piece, I describe my confusion of arriving in the pitch black at Serenbe. And I literally, in my mind, as we were riding the golf cart, I was picturing sort of, and I think actually even before I got there, I reached out to you, Monica, and I said, I just want to be clear, like, is there Wi-Fi at Serenbe? Like I had no real understanding of like exactly how connected it was. Even after reading through the website and all of the literature about it, I still sort of felt like I was going to be in the middle of nowhere, like maybe, sort of roughing it or almost on some sort of like camp situation. Or it would be the type of place where people move to and they're like really strict about, not being too plugged in. And yet when I got there, and when I saw it in the light of day, I was completely amazed by how, state of the art and high functioning everything is there. Like things at Serenbe almost run more smoothly than they do in New York City or Boston or Chicago. It's like it feels, the infrastructure there is unbelievable. And sort of the convenience kind of blew me away. And so, that was a big surprise for me. And then, I mean, I think along the similar lines as the Wi-Fi stuff, I think I had an idea of Serenbe coming in that it would be filled with people who were total wellness freaks, who were doing like macrobiotic diets, and they were vegans, and I had a very extreme like image in my mind beforehand, and so I was very like happy and relieved to experience Serenbe as just like a completely normal place, and it's not overwhelmed by dogma. It's not people shoving ideology about wellness down your throat. And it also struck me that the people who move there are not necessarily people who are super into wellness beforehand. It just happens to come as a nice side effect of living there. And I also, another thing is, I have very much experienced the wellness community through a very commercial lens that is very social media focused. And it's Gwyneth Paltrow, it's Goop, it's drinking turmeric lattes and going to hot yoga and, using crystals and going on strange retreats. And so I think in that whole universe, what has gotten lost is like a very simple back to basics idea of wellness and like biophilic living, as you describe it, Steve, just sort of being connected with nature, eating plants and fruits and vegetables when you can, and, walking places and just saying hi to people as you pass them on the street. I was surprised and very pleasantly surprised to experience that version of wellness, which is a term that has been kind of diluted and commercialized over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that's something that we struggle with sometimes, because obviously it does have meaning, but is it being co-opted on this sort of, again, I think that's an interesting commercial lens to think about. And all of those things are wonderful and fun and great. And you want to have, goat yoga in and of itself is sort of this quirky concept, right? But, how do you sort of take it all not so seriously maybe, or that it's an aspect of your life? It isn't this dogma. And we are sort of pushed into this like all or nothing. And, I know, Steve, we talk a lot about balance and how we can have balance in life.
It's going to be interesting because I think you bring a great perspective, because a lot of people see Serenbe and places like it is that foreign, that exotic, something that's unfamiliar. And everyone is used to their own schedules. And I think you kind of pointed that out, how, it's kind of ready to get back to New York. I'm wondering if this pandemic, which has really pulled a lot of people out of their normal, I read some articles talking about muscle memory, that it's really adjusting people's muscle memory, whether it's attending meetings or how we function. And how do you think we're going to, as a society, what's going to change as we come back out of this?
Well, I've heard some interesting things. I mean, as a freelancer, somebody who typically works from home and makes my own schedule anyway, I think the muscle memories, like I'm used to sitting at my own desk in my own home, working at my kitchen table. So that hasn't changed so much for me. But I have heard from people who work in offices in New York City is that what is happening is that a lot of companies and a lot of managers and bosses and employees are realizing that it's possible to, do the job without even having an office. So it's like sort of, why pay rent at a midtown office building if you can just have everybody work from home? And I don't know exactly how I feel about that. That seems like a bridge too far. And so I hear two different things. I hear people saying when this is all over, everybody will be so excited to go back to normal of gathering in large crowds and going to restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. And then I hear people saying, no, actually quarantine is proving to us the ways that we can live that we thought was previously, inaccessible or impossible to do. And I don't know if you saw this article, it was in the Times a few weeks ago, that now this is going to spark a huge shift in the appeal of major cities. And, people like young people, like the sentiment about moving to major cities like San Francisco, Chicago, New York, et cetera, Atlanta, was already kind of on the decline. And now that there is this image of these cities as vectors for virus and petri dishes for disease and dysfunction and chaos, people are going to be flocking to cities a lot less. And I think that could be true. I think that could be true. And I certainly, in this experience, have found myself appreciating this new rural life that I have more than I ever thought I did beforehand. But then I think back to something like 9/11. And, I think there was a little bit of a dip after 9/11 and people moving to New York. But then, Mayor Bloomberg did so many things to make New York City appealing that 9/11 ultimately ended up making, the rehabilitation of New York made it way more desirable than it had been in the past. And then rents skyrocketed. People flocked from Europe and all over the place to live in New York City. And it became even more of a dense metropolitan area than it had before. So I think that we're definitely going to have a few years of people not necessarily fantasizing about cities in the same way that they did before, and perhaps wanting to be in more remote areas and willing to live in more remote areas. We're experiencing at Serenbe, anyone with second homes, whether it's Atlanta, New York, or where, they've all come here. And it sounds like you experienced that same thing with the house you'd rented in Rhode Island. And I would imagine you're finding a lot of the second home folks in Rhinebeck are there rather than being New York. I wonder if it could change that now that we can work in these remote places, that we have our second home in the New York or in the big cities.
and our primary residence might be in these more remote places. I don't think people are going to give up the city, but they might find that they don't have to work within the four walls within the city. It's more fun to be in the rural and have the city available on a more specific time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be the case. Now I want to work towards saving for a second home. In the case that's something I used to want to buy property in New York City, and now I'm like, a second home in the country or a first home in the country seems so much more desirable at this moment.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea of that your primary or your first home you buy is actually I don't want to call it a vacation home, but it's your house outside the city, and then you're just renting something inside the city that is sort of, that's the temporary, but your permanent is this more rural or a place where there's land conservation and you can really get outside. Mm-hmm. Because I think that's what we've been starting to hear from people. We've seen interest in rentals spike quite a bit, extended, not long-term leases, but anywhere between, 2, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. And I'm hearing that more and more as the summer comes online and their kids maybe aren't on online school, or they feel like, this is going to continue and we can work from quote anywhere. They can come to Serenbe for the summer and sort of get out, quote unquote, of wherever they are. My brother, for instance, is out in Culver City, and they have a really lovely little walkable neighborhood, but it's a tiny little backyard and the parks are all closed. The beaches are all closed. I talked to a friend of mine in DC, same thing. And both of them, who obviously have been to Serenbe, fans of Serenbe, both said to me, what can I rent for like 3 to 4 weeks? And that was sort of shocking to me, even though I knew that they were interested and liked it. I'm hearing more of that, even from Atlantans. What can I rent down there? Is there something that I can do for a month? So that's going to be interesting to see what happens over the coming months, as again, people don't have to be in an office. Many companies are extending their work from home all summer. Some of them are extending it through the end of the year, because really the virus isn't going anywhere. And so these companies that have really dense workspaces, they've got to either rearrange their whole office or, have, you come in for 2 days and then the other half of the staff comes in for another 2 days. I don't think that the real estate's going to go away in New York from a commercial standpoint, but you do wonder if they can sort of bring the footprint down, which is going to change the WeWorks of the world, or these, gorgeous towers that, Condé Nast has, or the New York Times. Will you only need to come in if you are on staff once a week or twice a week? Because there is something about that being together and the creativity and moving projects forward that we've realized how much we can do virtually, which you knew already as a journalist. Mm-hmm. What projects are you working on? Or are you hearing from editors? Like, what are they interested these days? Like, is it, it seems like it's just been COVID, but that's going to have to pivot at some point and get back to more general interest. I mean, are you hearing, or what would you want to write about, or what are you hearing about?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I haven't really been able to figure out at this moment. I do know that my editor at Outside Magazine, as well as any other magazine that I write for, they are not only desperate for content that is relevant to COVID and pieces of COVID reporting. And I'm not a hard news reporter. I'm a magazine journalist who mostly writes about culture, whether it's the arts or about, lifestyle and to things like that. So I'm not somebody who's going to be sent to a hospital in Brooklyn to report on what the ventilator status is. And so I'm hearing a lot of solicitations for pitches that are not necessarily related to COVID, but that can be done remotely and virtually, and don't necessarily, like, I would never be able to report the Serenbe piece right now because it would require flying and interacting with other humans. I actually, and I did I had been assigned a piece on a young actress, and it was assigned right before all of this happened. And then we ended up and so they'd gotten all the photographs of her. And, but then when it came time to do the interview, we were all sheltering in place. And so we had to do the interview over FaceTime. And it was my first kind of reporting experience in quarantine. And I actually found it really cool because everybody has something to talk about. There's this immediate shared interest among everybody. It's not like you're grasping for things to connect about because everybody's in this same strange situation. And so that made it a lot easier in some ways. I do think there's going to come a point in a few months where everybody has fatigue about COVID and about like, I think if you open up a New Yorker or an Outside magazine or a GQ or a New York Times magazine in the next several years, inevitably there's going to be the 6 paragraphs that you get to where you're like, okay. And then the coronavirus happened and, we're going to be hearing about this. There's no way to do anything without sort of framing it through the lens of COVID, which is, I think it'll be good and bad.
Yeah, definitely. Did you ever have to be required to sort of go into the city for meetings for work or with the magazines, or it's always been freelance at your kitchen table?
No. So I would say I go into the New York, I meet with editors in the city, or previously I met with editors in the city maybe once every couple of weeks, whether it's editor at this magazine or that magazine. And then, the New Yorker has these big group ideas meetings every month where, a group of writers will come and they'll all be crammed into one room talking about ideas for the magazine, which I think they've either canceled them or they're going to resume on Zoom for the foreseeable future. And I really love meeting people. As somebody who's holed up in her apartment all day long, like the prospect of going to lunch or coffee with somebody I work with is always welcome. So I'm a little bit sad to see that being put on pause, and I will be very grateful for the face-to-face contact once it does start up.
And tell me, like, what kind of things, because now you're out sort of taking walks and cooking, like I assume your stress level has, I don't know if you had a high one, but where you were seeking meditation and different retreats and stuff, do you feel like you have the need for any of that now? Or is it sort of taking care of itself because you're sort of have a slower paced life?
That is a very good question and something I've been contemplating. I think this is an unusual, it's not as if I've moved out here in a normal situation or I'm just taking a vacation. I think that if my day-to-day mental stress is probably pretty high depending on how much of the news I'm reading or
that's true.
That kind of thing. And yet I bet if somebody hooked up electrodes and did blood tests and stuff, they would find lower levels of cortisol, lower stress hormones in general. And I bet my physical chemistry is way more balanced than it was 3 or 4 months ago.
Right.
Your changed location, how has it changed your work habits? For instance, sitting at the desk, being within closed space at Rhinebeck and in New York, do you tend to get up and go outside for shorter periods and come back in, or has that changed at all?
It hasn't changed too much. One thing that I am noticing, I'm doing this thing that a lot of people are doing, which is forcing themselves to kind of open up a day planner and a calendar and write down like what they're going to do that day. And usually even in quarantine where there are no distractions, really, I still find it very hard to keep to a schedule. I don't know if you guys are also experiencing that. Like somehow the to-do list is always too long, no matter what, even when there's nothing else to do. But one thing I have noticed that has been really enjoyable for me is with a little bit less work than usual, a little bit less distraction, a little bit less stress and kind of visual and psychological noise, I found that I've taken a lot more pleasure in writing. Like it used to be when I was at my peak stress in New York and, had so many things going on. I had to go to meet with an editor, then I had to go to somebody's book party, then I had to go do a movie, a restaurant, etc. I was really cramming the writing in a way that was not pleasurable. And here I have found that like actually sitting down to write, I'm kind of remembering why I liked it so much to begin with. I get to take time to do it and think.
Yeah. I do wonder if we'll, as we've stripped away, by necessity things that we used to do, whether that was for business or for personal, I wonder what things that we will leave behind permanently. and I'm sort of curious about that, where the writing isn't work, but it's pleasure. It isn't something you squeeze in between all these fabulous fun things that you want to do. But do we maybe start saying no instead of yes to things? That'll be interesting to see. People are sort of talking about living slowly. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but it'll be interesting to see what we take from this time and we continue to incorporate, kind of to Steve's point about muscle memory.
Yeah.
Steve, do you have anything that you're doing differently that you've incorporated? I haven't really asked you that question. I'm just curious, have you changed something that maybe you're more focused on or you have more time for now that you'll continue on in your...
It's amazing how uninterrupted and different life is here. It really isn't changed that much. I mean, the big difference is it would seem strange to get in a car. In a normal week, I might have, one meeting maybe in Atlanta. And so I would make sure that any errands or anything I wanted to do in Atlanta was there. And I don't do that, and I don't miss that at all. And I also got in a car every week to go to Pilates, which wasn't here. So I'm really looking forward to the Pilates studio that's going to open here at some point this fall. To where literally it's, I realize how I don't like driving.
Yeah, maybe quarantine is your ideal lifestyle. And I was also thinking you must be so relieved to have made that big life choice that you made in the 90s of quitting the restaurant business, because it seems like the restaurant business is really kind of the worst, scariest place to be right now. And Serenbe seems like a much better situation.
Yes. And of course we have the restaurants here, so that, we have some of those same pressures, but it's very different. I see just in Atlanta, there are 2 restaurants who have announced that they're closing permanently. They're restaurants that have been around, and they've just taken this opportunity and say, we're not coming back. Clearly it's people that have been thinking about this, and this is kind of the threshold.
Right.
It's going to change. It's going to be difficult. And many restaurants, even though they can open unlimited, for instance, in Atlanta, they can't survive at a 20% occupancy. That just isn't going to work. So that's why this limited opening is not economically going to really be feasible.
No, and I think you would agree with this, Steve, that by the way that you've built Serenbe and the neighbors, they're really who kept the restaurants alive with the takeout and the to-go that we've had over the past month, as well as our farm stand. You had this built-in ecosystem or economy that typically would have been 10% of our sales and 90% were sort of guests, but really. In this retraction where we had to lay off, the majority of the staff, and we just had a couple people working, hopefully I think the residents realized how beneficial it was to have the restaurants, and then the restaurants realized how beneficial it is to have that sort of built-in audience, which is very unusual.
Yeah, I'm sort of hoping that this whole situation moves people a little bit further away, or starts to move people away from, this obsession with convenience and doing everything over an app, ordering, food on Seamless or Grubhub or whatever, or having everything delivered to you, Postmates, all of this kind of stuff. I'm now that's the only way to have things, the only way to do things at this moment. I'm thinking, when everything sort of goes back to normal, I'm going to cook for myself. I'm going to go outside and see a movie in a theater instead of just binge watching TV. I'm going to, I'm actually going to, I'm going to go inside of a store and pick something out that I want and need and interact with a human being instead of pressing a button on my phone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is there anything you want to add? Any thoughts, any personal projects you're working on that have been interesting or?
No, nothing too exciting, just small pieces here and there. One thing I did, and Steve, maybe you'll be able to answer this. I mean, I'm curious. I don't know if you guys think a lot about climate change, but I'm curious how this slowdown is going to have an impact on climate change, and whether or not in some weird, strange way, like that's like an upside to COVID, is that it's forcing everybody to really slow down and reduce their carbon footprint. And I wonder if, Steve, if that's something that you think about.
All the time. And I mean, this is one of the big things that I hope comes out of it. And I think it's that people have thought it was a difficult thing. What they individually did wouldn't make a difference. And now we see with the flick of a switch, literally, we have blue skies, we have cleaner air, our waters are cleaner. It happens so quickly that I would hope it's given policymakers and the individual public realization that changes now can affect where we live immediately. This is some 10, 20-year thing. So why should I change my life today? And I'm hoping that happens, but it's going to take some major policy changes and change in muscle memory. Use a lot fewer cars, shared transportation. Living where we work, whether that's working remotely or closer to where you can walk to it. All those things are going to have to change. And if we really move, for instance, we really need to move forward with electric cars. Our clear skies currently, I think I read somewhere it was if 40% of our current cars were converted to electricity, we would have some of the same effects that we're experiencing today.
Wow.
So, hopefully this increases the will to really move forward with these issues. Because here it is. And it isn't just the United States, it's, around the world that we need to change that policy.
Absolutely.
I would hope in the media that there's some that we start cataloging the people who are dying really a lot more about who they are. Does the air quality of where you live affect it? Has that affected your lungs, and are your lungs compromised? And some of the other issues, at best, we're now looking at age. Some are looking at race, but I haven't seen many studies going beyond that. And so that's what I hope, that there's some studies that connect the dots and then really see that dealing with the environment is actually a health issue.
Well, and we saw our friend Jeff Katch at Rodale Institute sent us a list of sort of 7 silver lining trends of COVID. And one of them was the interest in wellness and immunity. And then another one I thought was really fabulous was land conservation. That people are really appreciating being outside and appreciating large swaths of it, right? Not just a small corner park. And that they believe would be a big change is land conservation, as well as I think this study had said that something like organic food sales were up 22% in March.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'll forward it to you.
Yeah, I would love to read that stuff.
But I think those are the things that I'm hoping to see written about, and covered. To Steve's point is, these underlying conditions, many of them are preventable.
Right.
And so what are the things that we can do to get people in a healthier place and reconsider their health is so important, especially in a time like this.
Right. Being preventative as opposed to reactive with your own well-being. Yeah.
Well, Carrie, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. And we would love to have you back when we're all out of shelter and can get on a plane safely. And
no, absolutely. And thank you for inviting me on this. It's always so exciting and nice to get an opportunity to see some fresh faces.
Yeah, no, it is. It's nice to see you again. I know. Outside of our Serenbe.
Yeah. That's the most exciting thing that's happened to me today. So.
Oh, the most exciting thing that's happened to you today. That's great. Yeah. I like it. Maybe this whole month.
Maybe this whole year.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie.
Thanks,
Have a great week. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
There are 2 rubrics in building a city. You can follow the sprawl mentality, or you can preserve land while boosting economic development. Serenbe builds and designs to be both beautiful and environmentally sustainable. If you're a city planner, developer, landowner, or policymaker, there are common sense solutions you can take to build a biophilic-centered community. Attend the Nygren Placemaking Conference this fall to learn more. Details at nygrenplacemaking.com. That's NYGRENPLACEMAKING.com.
Thank you for listening to Serenbe Stories. New episodes are available on Mondays. Please rate and review the podcast and make sure to email your questions for Steve Nygren to stories@serenbe.com. You may even get to hear them on the podcast. More details about episodes and guests are available on our website, serenbestories.com.